You know that feeling when you're trapped in a storm with no way out? That's exactly what depression feels like. For Nathan, it was an endless cycle of darkness, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. He had tried everything: therapy, medication, even distractions, but nothing seemed to make the weight on his chest lift. No one really understood what he was going through, and honestly, he didn't know how to explain it. He was stuck, and it seemed like there was no way forward. But what if I told you there's a way out? What if the secret to beating depression wasn't something complicated or out of reach? What if, instead, the solution is simpler and closer than you think? It wasn't until Nathan faced his deepest fears that he realized the key to freedom wasn't about fixing himself, but about understanding the path to healing, and it wasn't a straight line. This story isn't just about one man's struggle with mental health. It's about how anyone, yes, even you, can reclaim their life from the shadows. In the next few minutes, you'll uncover practical, real-life strategies that can help you overcome depression, heal naturally, and rise stronger than ever. So, if you're tired of fighting alone or feeling like your battle is endless, it's time to change that. Keep reading and discover how you too can beat depression. Nathan, a man in his early 30s, lived a life that anyone would describe as typical. He worked a stable office job, clocking in every morning at the same time, greeted by the familiar glow of his computer screen and the smell of fresh coffee. His days were filled with deadlines, polite emails, and small office chatter that always seemed to repeat itself. To the outside world, he was just another guy blending into the crowd, but for Nathan, every day was a balancing act, meticulously curated down to the minute. Routine was Nathan's safe haven. He started each day with a quick workout, a ritual that made him feel both refreshed and oddly accomplished before the chaos of work began. When he got home, his evenings were usually spent with his loyal dog, Max, who was always ready for a walk no matter the weather. Weekends? Well, those were his sacred days for unwinding. A night out with friends at the local pub or a quiet evening lost in the latest crime novel. Those were the moments he lived for, where he could just be himself, away from the constant demands of his job. Nathan had a personality people often described as calm. Nothing seemed to ruffle him. He was the friend everyone could count on, the guy who always seemed to know the right thing to say. Sure, he had dreams and aspirations, ideas about what he wanted his life to look like, but they were the sort of vague thoughts he'd entertain in passing before setting them aside, deciding that they could wait for another day. After all, there was always tomorrow. People might think he had it all figured out, but truthfully, Nathan was starting to feel like something was missing. Life felt a bit like a long hallway, each door leading to the same place. Somewhere deep down, he sensed a growing restlessness, a feeling he couldn't quite put his finger on, but one that lingered like a low hum in the background of his everyday life. It was an unexpected turn of events that finally shook Nathan's steady world. One afternoon, out of the blue, he received a call with news he hadn't been prepared for. His father had fallen seriously ill. His father, who had always been his anchor, a rock of strength and advice, was suddenly vulnerable. The daily trips to the hospital, the anxious hours waiting for updates, and the endless questions he could never find answers to, it all started to weigh him down. The constant worry gnawed at him, creating a pressure he hadn't felt before. Nathan tried to keep up with his life, but his routine felt like a distant memory. His job, which once brought him a sense of accomplishment, now felt empty and hollow. The small talk with colleagues seemed trivial, almost irritating. Even time with Max, his faithful companion, became an obligation rather than a pleasure. Every part of his life seemed to dim, and soon the spark he once felt each morning had dulled. This wasn't just stress or a few bad days. It was something deeper, something heavier that seemed to settle into his bones. The friends he once spent weekends with? They began to notice the change too. He'd skip out on plans, offer vague excuses, and when he did show up, it was like he wasn't really there. People asked if he was okay, but he couldn't find the words to explain the storm brewing inside him. It was as if the weight of the world was pressing down, but no one else could see it. His thoughts grew darker, his emotions harder to manage. He felt trapped in his own mind, every day a little more withdrawn. The toughest part for Nathan was the silence. When he was alone, when the world was quiet, that's when it hit hardest. His usual calm demeanor gave way to waves of anxiety that he couldn't shake off. Sleep became a battle, his mind racing with fears about his father, his future, and worst of all, a growing sense of emptiness he couldn't understand. It was as if a dark cloud had settled over his life, one that refused to lift, no matter how hard he tried to shake it off. When Nathan felt he was at his lowest, help came from an unexpected place. One afternoon, his neighbor Mrs. Carter, a retired school teacher in her 70s with a kind yet no-nonsense demeanor, noticed him in the hallway. She'd seen the shift in him, and without prying too much, she invited him over for tea. What he thought would be a simple chat turned into the start of a turning point in his life. Over countless cups of tea, she shared with him her own experience of grappling with dark times, and how she found solace through something called mindfulness meditation. At first, Nathan wasn't sure what to make of it. Mindfulness sounded a bit foreign, a bit, well, abstract. But Mrs. Carter was patient, guiding him through a few simple exercises she'd learned over the years. She encouraged him to focus on being present, to let go of the racing thoughts even if just for a few moments. She explained how this practice had helped her manage stress, deal with loss, and even find peace in situations that seemed unbearable. Slowly, Nathan began to feel a glimmer of hope, something he hadn't felt in a while. To his surprise, practicing mindfulness began to help Nathan find some peace amidst the chaos. Each morning he started with a short, quiet moment, just focusing on his breath. It wasn't easy, and sometimes his thoughts still swirled, but Mrs. Carter reminded him that mindfulness was about practice, not perfection. She taught him that finding calm wasn't about erasing his thoughts, but about observing them without judgment. In these small moments he found a release, a chance to just be, without the weight of expectations or worries pressing down. Mrs. Carter also encouraged him to explore more of what mindfulness could offer. She recommended a few books and even some online guided meditations to help him dive deeper. Nathan was skeptical but decided to give it a try. Over time, he noticed subtle changes. Not only was he more in control of his emotions, but his focus returned, his patience grew, and he even began sleeping better. He hadn't expected it, but Mrs. Carter's guidance was becoming the light he needed to find his way out of the darkness. The real shift for Nathan came with an unexpected invitation. Mrs. Carter handed him a flyer for a weekend mindfulness retreat in the countryside, led by experienced teachers. At first, Nathan hesitated. A retreat? It seemed extreme, even unnecessary. His mind filled with doubts, leaving his father, his work, his routines, everything familiar. Yet, Mrs. Carter assured him that this experience would be unlike anything he'd ever done. She called it a chance to reset, to step away from the noise of everyday life and focus solely on healing. After wrestling with the idea for days, Nathan decided he had nothing left to lose. He signed up. When the day came to leave, Nathan's nerves kicked in. Saying goodbye to Max and walking out of his apartment felt like leaving a part of himself behind. But something deeper urged him on, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The drive to the retreat was quiet and tense, his mind bouncing between excitement and apprehension. Could this really help him? Would he even fit in with the others? The questions swirled, yet he pushed forward, drawn by the promise of finding some relief, some answer. Arriving at the retreat center was like stepping into a new world. Surrounded by trees, fresh air, and the distant sound of a river, Nathan felt a calmness he hadn't known he needed. The people he met were kind, each carrying their own silent burdens just like him. The instructors welcomed them all with a warmth and sincerity that put him at ease. They spoke of being present, letting go of expectations, and embracing whatever emotions arose. It was foreign, but somehow he felt like he belonged. Over the next few days, Nathan immersed himself in the experience. The silent mornings, the guided meditations, the group reflections. Everything pushed him out of his comfort zone. At times, he felt tempted to walk away, especially when he had to face his own thoughts in total silence. But each time he thought of leaving, he remembered why he was there. This was his journey, his chance to finally find peace, even if the path was uncomfortable. With every session, he felt himself shedding a bit of the old weight he'd carried for so long. As the retreat days unfolded, Nathan found himself facing challenges he never anticipated. During a session on facing inner fears, he was asked to reflect on memories he had long buried. It was uncomfortable, even painful. His mentor encouraged him to breathe through it, to sit with the discomfort rather than flee from it. Slowly, Nathan began understanding that these exercises weren't about fixing things right away. They were about building resilience, about finding strength within himself that he hadn't realized was there. One evening they practiced a silent hike through the forest. The silence was intense, and each step seemed to echo his thoughts and insecurities. But he pressed on, reminded by Mrs. Carter's words, "Sometimes the hardest path leads to the greatest growth." The hike was physically demanding, and his mind tried to convince him to turn back several times. But surrounded by others pushing through their own struggles, Nathan felt a newfound determination rise within him. Each step became an affirmation that he could keep going, even when the way forward seemed daunting. Nathan wasn't alone in this journey. He began forming connections with others at the retreat, individuals who were also wrestling with their own battles. Sharing their stories around the campfire created a sense of solidarity that made him feel less isolated in his struggle. These fellow travelers offered support, and in them he found encouragement that made his journey feel manageable. Together, they celebrated small victories and lifted each other during the rougher moments. Amidst all of this, Nathan discovered an unexpected adversary, himself. Self-doubt would creep in during meditation or reflective exercises, whispering that he wasn't strong enough, that he didn't deserve peace. This inner critic was perhaps the toughest challenge of all, and every day was a test of his resolve. But with each practice and every breakthrough, he found a renewed sense of purpose. Little by little, he was learning to quiet the doubts, to replace the negative self-talk with compassion and belief in his own strength. As Nathan neared the end of the retreat, he sensed that his journey was building toward a pivotal moment. His mentor introduced an intensive meditation session, one designed to help participants confront their deepest fears and insecurities. It was the ultimate test, and Nathan knew it. This final session would push him to his limits, asking him to face everything he'd been avoiding. The thought was intimidating, yet he also felt ready, equipped with the tools he'd gained along the way. To prepare, Nathan spent the night reflecting on the lessons he'd learned. He thought about the power of being present, of showing kindness to himself, of seeing the bigger picture rather than getting lost in immediate struggles. He remembered the encouragement from his fellow participants and the moments of clarity he'd experienced during the silent hikes. As dawn approached, he felt an odd sense of peace. This confrontation wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding and embracing all parts of himself, even the messy, uncomfortable ones. Entering the meditation room, Nathan felt the weight of what was ahead. The room was dimly lit, filled with quiet, and everyone around him was equally focused. His mentor guided them into deep meditation, urging them to let go of judgments, to release any lingering self-doubt, and to simply observe their thoughts. Nathan's mind filled with memories, regrets, and unspoken fears. But instead of shrinking from them, he acknowledged each one, accepting them as part of his story without letting them define him. It was a powerful realization, a moment of genuine self-acceptance that he hadn't believed possible before. When the session ended, Nathan emerged with a renewed sense of clarity. It was as though a weight had lifted, allowing him to breathe fully for the first time. He knew that this wasn't the end of his journey but rather the beginning of a new way of living, one rooted in awareness and resilience. The tools he'd gained would be his allies going forward, helping him navigate life's challenges with a calm and centered mind. And as he looked around the room, he saw that he wasn't alone. Each person there had fought their own battles, and together they had made it through. Just when Nathan thought he had turned a corner, life threw him a curveball. Back in his day-to-day world, the peaceful insights and strength he'd found at the retreat were tested almost immediately. Old anxieties resurfaced, and a few harsh setbacks at work made him doubt his progress. The burden of daily pressures seemed even heavier now, as if they were mocking the peace he'd so carefully built. For a moment, Nathan wondered if he'd really changed at all, or if it had all been just a temporary escape. One particularly difficult day, Nathan faced a personal crisis that threatened to shatter the fragile stability he'd found. He was confronted by a project failure that not only impacted him but also affected his team, and the guilt felt overwhelming. The self-doubt, which he'd managed to quiet during his journey, roared back with a vengeance, filling his mind with criticism and regret. For the first time since the retreat, he felt the full force of his depression creeping back in, casting a shadow over his progress. It was in this moment of despair that he remembered Mrs. Carter's words, "Resilience isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up." Those words echoed in his mind, like a lifeline pulling him from a dark current. Taking a deep breath, he revisited the meditation practices he'd learned. He knew this low point was part of the process, an inevitable test to see if he would truly apply the tools he'd gained, especially when it mattered most. Through sheer will, Nathan decided to reach out for support rather than sinking back into isolation. He called a close friend from the retreat, sharing his struggles openly, something he would have never done before. The conversation reminded him that setbacks didn't erase his progress. They simply highlighted areas where he could grow further. Slowly, his resolve began to rebuild. In facing this crisis, Nathan wasn't only preserving his progress. He was reinforcing it, strengthening the foundation of his resilience one hard moment at a time. Emerging from the toughest challenge yet, Nathan felt a profound shift within him, a sense of strength and peace he hadn't experienced before. This wasn't the fleeting relief he'd felt from past distractions or temporary highs. It was something deeper, a grounded resilience born from all he had faced. For the first time, he truly understood that his journey was more than a fight against depression. It was about embracing the tools he developed to live fully and authentically. In this newfound clarity, he discovered a gift, a kind of treasure that felt invaluable, the ability to find calm within himself, regardless of external chaos. He began to recognize the power of small daily rituals, like breathing exercises or a few moments of quiet reflection, to maintain his peace. Nathan also felt a deepened empathy for others, understanding that everyone was likely facing battles of their own. This awareness transformed his relationships, infusing them with patience and genuine compassion. As Nathan grew into this version of himself, his relationship with his depression shifted. He no longer saw it as an enemy to defeat, but rather as a teacher that had forced him to grow in ways he'd never imagined. This perspective softened his inner world, making space for kindness and self-compassion. He was learning that overcoming depression wasn't just about eradicating it, but about building a life strong enough to hold it without letting it take control. Through these realizations, Nathan felt an immense gratitude. He had found his way not only to healing but to a deeper purpose. The strength he'd earned from his journey was something he could now share, offering encouragement and insight to others walking similar paths. With each step forward, Nathan was no longer the man who began this journey. He was someone transformed, empowered, and truly alive. With his newfound strength and perspective, Nathan began to see the world around him differently. The hurdles that once seemed insurmountable now felt like opportunities to apply everything he'd learned. Even in the smallest moments, like navigating a tough day at work or helping a friend through a hard time, he noticed how his inner resilience had reshaped his reactions. He felt more centered, grounded, and for the first time in control of his life rather than at the mercy of his emotions. People around him sensed the change too. Friends and family noticed how he carried himself with a quiet confidence and an openness that was new. Conversations took on more depth, and those close to him felt the warmth and compassion he now radiated. It was as if his journey had given him a gift, something he could share without even trying. He no longer needed to hide his struggles or mask his feelings. Instead, he wore his experiences as a testament to his strength and growth. Nathan's day-to-day life became a series of small yet powerful affirmations. He didn't see himself as fully healed. There were still challenging moments, but he no longer feared them. Instead, he welcomed them as part of the life he was building, one where he could navigate hardships with courage and grace. This sense of acceptance allowed him to fully integrate his journey, seeing it not as a detour or burden but as the very thing that had shaped him into the person he was becoming. With each passing day, Nathan felt ready to take on new dreams and set new goals. He knew he'd never return to who he once was, and he had no desire to. The struggles he'd faced had been hard-won, but they had ultimately granted him a life filled with purpose and self-respect. Now, Nathan could look forward with a clear heart, carrying the tools he'd gathered on his journey, fully prepared for whatever life would bring next. Nathan's return to his daily life was a quiet one, but the changes within him were unmistakable. He didn't have to announce his transformation to anyone. It was evident in the way he walked, the way he spoke, and the way he showed up for others. He'd returned to the world he once knew, but he was no longer the man who had left it. It was as if the entire journey had been a long process of shedding old skin, and now he was stepping into a new reality where his past struggles no longer defined him. They had refined him. His relationships shifted too. His loved ones who had once seen him caught in the shadows of depression, now saw him as a source of strength and clarity. They could sense the peace that radiated from him, and they turned to him for advice, for wisdom. Nathan had become a beacon for others who were navigating their own struggles, and he was more than willing to share the lessons he'd learned. The way he now saw his life was a gift he was eager to pass on, whether through simple conversations or by leading by example. Although his battle with depression was in the past, Nathan didn't see it as something to completely leave behind. He understood that life had a way of throwing curveballs, and he would need to continue practicing the skills that had helped him through his hardest moments. But instead of fearing the possibility of future struggles, he now felt confident that he could handle whatever came his way. The tools he developed were not just for surviving, they were for thriving. Nathan was no longer afraid of what might come next because he knew, deep down, that his journey had prepared him for whatever was ahead. As he re-entered the world, his purpose felt clearer than ever before: to live authentically, to be present, and to offer hope to others who were still struggling to find their way. His return was not just a return to the familiar, it was a return to his true self, one that he was proud to share with the world. Nathan's transformation had gone deeper than just overcoming depression. It had reshaped every aspect of his life. He had learned to view challenges not as roadblocks but as stepping stones on the path to growth. The struggles he had once endured had become the very foundation for his new, empowered life. He no longer felt tethered to the weight of his past. Instead, he carried it with a sense of gratitude, understanding that it had shaped him into someone more resilient and compassionate. In his personal life, Nathan found a new sense of purpose. He had discovered his true passions, things he'd buried under the weight of self-doubt before, and he was actively pursuing them. Whether it was a new hobby, a career change, or simply dedicating more time to his health, Nathan now embraced each day with enthusiasm. His energy was no longer drained by negative thoughts or self-sabotage. It was channeled into things that nourished his soul and brought him joy. Nathan's relationships also flourished in this new chapter. He was more present, more connected to those around him. His friends and family who had once been worried about him, now found themselves inspired by his journey. Nathan wasn't just a survivor of depression. He had become a beacon of hope and resilience. He had learned to listen more, understand better, and offer support in ways that truly made a difference to those he cared about. Perhaps most importantly, Nathan had found peace within himself. He no longer needed external validation or approval. He understood that true happiness and fulfillment came from within, not from anyone else's expectations. He had learned how to fight depression by fighting his own limiting beliefs, and in doing so he had unlocked a new life, one that was full of purpose, balance, and self-love. He was no longer the man he had once been. He was someone who had learned how to thrive, and he was eager to help others find the same strength within themselves. Nathan's return to his normal life felt nothing like the ordinary routine he had once known. On the surface, things were much the same. He still went to work, had dinner with his family, and caught up with friends on weekends, but beneath it all, he was a different person. The journey he had been on had transformed him, and now, even in the most mundane moments, he could feel the depth of his growth. It was as if he had unlocked a hidden layer of his existence, one that allowed him to experience life with more clarity, peace, and gratitude. No longer consumed by self-doubt or the grip of depression, Nathan found it easier to be present. He paid closer attention to the small moments, whether it was a conversation with a loved one, the beauty of nature, or simply enjoying a quiet cup of coffee. These moments, which had once slipped by unnoticed, were now treasured, adding depth to his daily life. He had learned to savor life, to embrace the simple joys that came with each day, and he did so with a heart full of appreciation. Nathan was also more committed to helping others who were facing the struggles he once did. He had become an advocate for mental health, sharing his story with anyone who would listen. Whether through casual conversations or more structured support groups, he offered his experiences as a beacon of hope. He no longer saw himself as someone who had merely survived depression. He now saw himself as a guide for others who were still in the thick of their own battles. Although his life had returned to a semblance of normality, Nathan knew that he had entered a new phase of his existence. The person who had walked out of that dark place of despair was not the same person who had returned. He had a new understanding of what truly mattered and a deep sense of purpose. His journey had allowed him to break free from the chains of depression, and now he was living with intention, moving forward with a renewed sense of self. Now it's your turn. Imagine a life where depression no longer holds you back. A life where you wake up each day feeling empowered, grounded, and connected. It's not just a dream, it's a reality that you can create just like Nathan did. The strategies and insights shared in this story aren't reserved for a lucky few. They're tools you can begin applying today. But it all starts with action. Will you choose to take the first step? Are you ready to invest in your mental health and reclaim your peace? It won't always be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. The journey to overcoming depression is real, and you have the power to take it. So, what's your next move? Share your thoughts, take action, and start your own journey to healing. And don't forget, there's a whole community out here ready to support you. If this story inspired you, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can continue learning more about mental health strategies, overcoming depression, and building the life you deserve.